couple of weeks ago if you were asked us to cover a certain sum, and today we're going to be doing exactly just that. What are we on for today, Danzy?
Yeah, thank you, Manny. Today we are going to cover something that happens even before you start using your PC, and that's deciding the right specs for the PC so that you don't have a PC that is overkill or a PC that becomes a bottleneck for you. Now, the first item that I would say is non-negotiable when you are trying to purchase a laptop, right, would be the CPU. So for CPUs, we have various categories. We would usually have the i3, the i5, i7, and 9, i9. AMD too has a similar ranking grading. Now, i3, I would shy away from it, especially if you are going to do anything beyond just browsing. So i5 would be the basic minimum, if you ask me. With i7, I would say if you are doing anything that is beyond the i5, you could go for the i7. And with i9, if you are building servers or you are just trying to run some form of containers, that's for those in the IT space, or if you are trying to do some form of high-end streaming and recording of videos, those in the photography and video editing space, that is where I would recommend the i9 as compared to the i7 or the i5. Now let's try moving to the RAM, and I'll bring money in here to speak on the RAM.
Yeah, RAMs are pretty interesting, honestly. And I'm gonna give two takes on it, one from the Mac side of things and another from the Windows side of things, because I have used both systems pretty intensely. And going off of Macs, I'm just gonna go with a little experience that I had actually. So I had a M2 Air, it had 8 gigs of RAM, and I got it while I was in college. That was just mainly for, doing basic college student work, doing assignments, little coding work here and there. And it worked out great, but right after I got out and I was like doing some more power user work, like training models, basic models on it, just running basic stuff on it, I found out pretty quickly that it wasn't going to cut it. And even like basic stuff like just having your browser open, having multiple browser tabs, Chrome hasn't been super great at handling that. And we've seen more of a shift where newer apps and even current apps, when they have upgrades, don't care a lot about your resources. They will absolutely ravage your RAM, absolutely ravage your CPU power. So we're getting to a time where apps are not being optimized more. So 8 gigs of RAM is definitely borderline and probably would not work great. What I'd highly recommend for a Mac is 16 gigs. I know they do have the 18 gigs where it's a little weird spot. I'd probably avoid that if I were you. Either go 16 or if you have financial capability, go 24 gigs of RAM. That's what I have right now for my M5 Pro. And honestly, it's been super great. It's worked out great. I do more work on it besides just having my little VS Code open and the little Spotify tab, headphones up, hoodie up, bashing some songs while writing some code. It works great. I'd highly recommend going with 24 gigs of RAM just because it works today. And even as you're going forward, you're going to be a little more future proof with that 24 gigs of RAM compared to having 8, which definitely wouldn't cut it for doing any meaningful work, or 16, which might be borderline close and you might have to upgrade a little bit. And that's a little more complex when we're talking about Macs because you can't just go get a new RAM stick. You're going to have to get a whole new MacBook, and it's going to save you a lot of money. Going on to Windows. So my PC has 16 gigs of RAM. It worked out great for a lot of stuff that I wanted to do. Again, just writing code. But the minute that I wanted to do some more power user work, because I was working on a project that included a RAG system. If you haven't heard about RAG simply stands for Retrieval Augmentation Generation. So I essentially wanted to make a knowledge base. So I had to do some chunkings and do some vector embeddings. And if you've ever worked with a RAG, you quickly find out that 16 gigs of RAM is nowhere near enough. So I had to do a little upgrade from 16 to 32 gigs of RAM. And honestly, it's been super great. It handles a lot of those, power user tasks pretty well. And I'm pretty sure I may not have to upgrade anytime sooner. But again, I've seen 48 gigs of RAM, which honestly might be a little overkill unless you're really sweating it in your gaming where every millisecond matters. So now we've talked about your CPU, we've talked about RAM. You at the back of the class, what do you think we're gonna have to cover next? Yeah, you got it right. SSDs. Tell us a little more about that, Danzy.
Great job there, Manny. And with SSDs, we would usually have two forms of storage, SSD and then the HDD. I believe we've come to that point where we hardly use the HDD because of some of its downsides. We may use it as external storage, but internal, hardly do we use that. So with SSD, I would suggest that if you are capable, go with a 1 TB as just a baseline. But I mean, if it's something that's going to be overkill for you, right? Be it because of your budget or just because of the kind of resources you will be dealing with, you could go with a 512 gigs and you should be fine. But if you try going with 256 gigs or even a 128 gigs, and so Windows is going to take about 80 gigs of storage, and you may have just a little bit to deal with. Now, mind you, you haven't even started installing the various apps that you need to work with. And so that's why I would suggest that with minimum, let's go with 512 gigs of SSD.
He's absolutely right on that. And for my Mac users, I made this mistake so y'all don't have to make it. For my first Mac, it had 256 gigs of SSD, and I kid you not, that was nowhere near enough. You're quickly gonna run out of usage pretty quick because only your system files might cover a good chunk of that, and now you're not left with a lot. And unlike Windows, where you could always just buy more, SSD and stick it in, for Mac, you literally can't do that. So you want to give yourself as much room as possible if your budget allows for it, and if not, just go to 512 and upwards. Now we're done talking about storage. Let's talk about the one thing I'm pretty sure 80% of all gamers have on their Christmas cards every single year. Let's talk about GPUs. For GPUs, I think we have pretty much two groups here. We have our gaming folks and we have our AI and ML people as well. So if you're into the AI side of things, you could probably still do a 1080 Ti for some of the work because it has a pretty huge VRAM. I think it's about 12 gigs of VRAM. Even though it's been out for a while, it still does a lot of heavy lifting in today's world. So 1080 Ti could do some basic work. And then for me personally, I have a 3070 Ti, and with that, I could run pretty smaller models. I'm talking about Communicate some of the models on Olama, smaller SLMs, you could run those. But if we're talking about GLM 5.2 scale, you're probably going to need some cloud computing for that because the price you're going to have to drop for a GPU and just running something in the cloud, you might be better off doing the cloud approach. For most modern works, yeah, you're probably going to be good with a 3070 Ti. Plus, if you really got the bag, go with a 5080, but then it's going to run you upwards of 1K. So do the math, and you might be better off either cloud computing for AI or just getting an older 1080 Ti if your goal is to run small language models. For gaming, again, it's pretty amazing how well the 1080 Ti has held itself for this amount of years. Because I do know a lot of friends that tend to play older or even newer map based games, and they still get along pretty well with the 1080 Ti. 3070 Ti, that's what I personally use because I play a lot of FC25. It works when combined with that 32 gigs of RAM, so that's going to be a pretty good setup to have. 50 series, I generally try to avoid, so we're talking 30, 50, 30, 60, 40, 50, 40, 60. Those are a little underpowered, so you're quickly gonna not be able to do super intense work.
Yeah, money, just a little bit of trick that I use when I'm trying to purchase a PC. What I usually do is to go to my system settings and just check the overall usage of the various resources, right? When I'm having a maximum load, that way I'm able to tell if the specs that I'm trying to get for the new PC cuts it for what I'm doing, if it's overkill or it's going to be a bottleneck. Also, another thing I would suggest that you do some form of research on it before you buy any form of PCs with regards to the chassis or the enclosure of the PC. Now, I do know that HP is notorious when it comes to hinges, right? Especially with mid-range forms of laptops. So, for example, if you want to buy, say, an HP Victus 16, I would suggest that you just go online, check the reviews about the hinge of the PC to be sure that you are not going to run into such issues. With Dell, I haven't seen such an issue, but it's something you may need to take note of before you buy any form of PCs. Yeah, and so I mean, these are the non-negotiable items that we would recommend you take a pretty look at before you purchase your next PC. Just let us know if there's anything we missed. Let us know in the comment section.
And the fun's not over yet. We're gonna have another video where me and Danzzy have a budget and build PCs or Newegg to see who's got a better build. So fun's never over. Stay tuned, and we'll let you know when that gets out so you can have some more fun with it. See y'all later.